Alright, so recently when I did the Get Shorty Be Cool video, I talked about another thing that would go with Get Shorty is Out of Sight, but I figured I would put it off for another reason, and at the time I wasn't really sure why, because we did that Tarantino thing when we first started this that I'm not really happy with anyway. Like, I would redo all of those. Uh, so this is probably a good way to
The rate that you're
further,
going, you might accomplish that.
yeah. Um, so it pretty much made sense where it was like, we might as well just do Out of Sight with Jackie Brown, right? Because I've forgotten how much Get Shorty and Out of Sight really do go together.
Hmm.
But obviously, there's a lot connecting this also, even particular characters. So this is reasonable, right?
Sure.
All right. So clearly, with the fact that I am one of the people between the two of us, we're gonna start with the Tarantino movie, right?
Hmm.
All right. So, what is your overall opinion of Jack? I know we've watched it endlessly. We're usually in the same room when we're doing it too. So,
Hmm.
what? But just in general, what are your thoughts on Jackie Brown?
I think it's really underrated.
Yeah, it's slowly finding its place in the Tarantino. It was considered the underrated Tarantino movie for so long that it's kind of getting out of that box finally,
I think what makes it different from the others is it's based off something else, which is not something he normally does. Well,
which is
let me
hilarious.
rephrase. It's based off, the entire story is based off of something. I mean, obviously, he used World War II and the Manson family. He didn't come up with those, but it was an original story set in that universe. This is one of the only ones he's done that there's actual source material for it. That's not
What's
real life.
What's really crazy is when you watch the Charlie Rose interview he did when Pulp Fiction was out,
Mhm.
and he was being hailed as he might be the greatest thing ever if he keeps this up.
Mhm.
Because you know how Tarantino has a knack nowadays for doing the whole saying he's going to do something, but then he says he might do this and he might do this, and there's like 20 different things he's brought up that he may or may not do.
Like his Star Trek movie.
Yeah, it's so weird to see 3 years before this existed. He's doing that interview for Pulp Fiction, and when the interview ends, Charlie Rose says, "So, what do you think your next project is going to be?" And he says, "Well, one thing I've really always wanted to do was adapt a novel, so I think I might try that." And sure enough, that's what he was doing.
He must not have liked it because he hasn't done it since.
But that's the thing. That's kind of the first thing I want to address is it's him adapting an Elmore Leonard novel, which is interesting because Tarantino is obviously known for the language of his characters and just the way they talk and how they talk.
Mhm.
And Leonard is known for the same thing, but both are like really individually identifiable. So when you Jackie Brown starts, the very first scene of dialogue we get is them watching the gun video, Lewis and Ordell.
Mhm.
And even though it's an Elmore Leonard novel and he's got his own language that's really recognizable, you would think that would be a hard thing to stray away from. Because I talked about when I talked about Be Cool, it felt like sacrilege. The scene where The Rock confronts Vince Vaughn in the street.
Mhm.
They decided to improv, and that scene ends up going nowhere. And it's like, why would you abandon Elmer Leonard's words to sloppily improv? Like, why would you not take advantage of the words being there? But with Tarantino, since he's got his own words, you would think, okay, how do you do Elmer Leonard but with somebody else's signature dialogue? It seems like it would be a really terrible idea if it were anybody else. But as soon as Ordell starts talking and we hear him, it is Tarantino dialogue through and through
Yeah.
in like the best way. Because it is worth noting. I This movie is amazing. I love everything about this movie, and I also don't want this to sound like I find the character of Jackie underwhelming in any way. That's not what I'm
Mhm.
saying at all. but it's just so well done, whether it be the dialogue or the things that it's building to or what's happening, and just the smoothness of it all. The first half hour of Jackie Brown is probably one of my favorite things that Tarantino has ever done.
Hmm.
Just that whole thing starting from he and Lewis watching the video to him showing Lewis Beaumont in the trunk. Everything in between that
Mm-hmm.
is flawless. Like I said, that's not to say that the rest of the movie isn't, but that particular half an hour is just one of my favorite Tarantino sections of anything. just watching Ordell do business loosely. Because what's interesting is when Ray is talking to Jackie later and he says, have you ever actually seen him deal guns? And she says no.
Mm-hmm.
And it occurred to me in that moment, we never actually see him do it either. The closest we get is we hear his dealings through phone calls, and we're always in mid phone call. It feels like we're not getting the whole thing exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But how much revolves around that, and how it's like this stepping off point, because it makes the world feel so huge, where you have all these characters, some of which we don't even see, and they're all kind of working. And like when you hear about just how many people and how many places Ordell knows and can use.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's like when he talks about his Sharonda's her name, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how he just mentions her in passing to Lewis. Yeah, and it's barely mentioned at all, but the second she shows up at the meet, we can put together who that is before we even know.
Yeah.
Just by one passing line that Ordell says to Lewis in that bar scene. And it's, yeah. So just that whole thing is just amazing to me. So
Mm-hmm. Plus, it's weird. This is kind of going a different direction, but I think the other thing that makes Jackie Brown different from the others is, other than Samuel L. Jackson, there's no regulars. Sid Haig would probably be the closest.
which of course his casting is a joke in itself, since he was the criminal multiple times in the old Pam Grier movies, and now he's the one that's putting her in jail. And that's another thing too, is talking about the Tarantino dialogue, where it's like he has ways of, like, one scene of dialogue, and this is also a very Leonard thing to do. So it, like, even though it's Tarantino dialogue, it perfectly fits in the style of adapting Leonard. Is how a lot of it is built on the dialogue, despite the fact that the plot is very much there.
Mm-hmm.
So you just get random moments that would only exist in Tarantino dialogue, like when they're in the apartment or the house, and they're watching. Melanie's watching that one movie, and Ordell just stops what he's saying to ask if the actor on TV is Rutger Hauer.
Mm-hmm.
And Melanie, a character who in any other movie would not know the answer to that, just casually says, "No, that's Helmut Berger." I don't know how Melanie knows that. She's just watched that many movies, I guess, while stoned. But
I
I feel,
guess.
but that in itself also feels like an in joke, because both Helmut Berger and Bridget Fonda are in Godfather 3.
Huh.
So it's inevitable that she knows him in like another universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's no way that wasn't on purpose. So, is there anything specific you want to touch on?
This it's a movie that, like, for me and you, has a lot of scenes that we quote from or pull from. Like, one of our longest running jokes is from the mall when they're doing the money drop, and we get and I think this might have been the first movie we noticed it, that the trademark De Niro stare.
Yeah, because we timed it once, because we're under the impression that may have been that moment that causes him to look at her like that may very well be what sealed her fate.
Yeah.
Even though it came a bit later, and it's like we timed that stare once.
I think it was 8 seconds.
8 seconds, but the thing is that sounds short, but when you're staring at somebody in total and complete silence, like when a movie stops for somebody to stare at another character, 8 seconds is a very long time.
Yeah, especially when it's De Niro staring at you.
Yeah, and that's when you get that sense where it's like, I'm pretty sure that's the moment that killed her.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously, she egged him on to the point of that in the parking lot. Not excusing Lewis, by the way, just saying that's what caused it.
Well, what's funny too is Lewis. For you and I have been talking about this word a lot, but Lewis for most of this movie is bumbling, and that's the first instance that we see him that we're like, oh shit, he doesn't fuck around.
Yeah, because the whole time she's calling him an idiot,
Mm-hmm.
we're like, yeah. Because that's what's interesting about. Because now that we're here, we might as well talk about De Niro for a little bit. Especially in 1997, his casting is so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those things. Obviously, Tarantino's always been known as a casting genius, but Lewis being played by De Niro, especially in 97, is something I know I never would have thought of.
Yeah.
Yet somehow it's like, it's perfect. Because there are those, it's the scene after he's killed Melanie and he's riding around with Ordell. And it's just, just the way his character is so nonchalant about this. And the fact that he's, when he's trying to justify why he shot her, you can barely hear because Ordell starts to talk over him.
Mm-hmm.
But he's justifying why he shot her, and he says, "You know how she is." and then just the way when he asks, "Well, is she dead?" Just the way he says, "Pretty much."
He's not sure.
And it's like just to shut Ordell up, he's like, "Okay, yes, she's dead. There, she's dead. Yeah, sure, she died. I guess."
Which probably sealed his fate.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's so weird to think about the history that Ordell and Lewis have, because they've been in multiple Leonard novels, one of which was adapted into his novel Switch was adapted into this movie Life of Crime.
Is that the one with Mos Def?
Yeah, it's Mos Def and John Hawkes playing Ordell and Lewis, and Isla Fisher plays Melanie. And it's definitely not in the same tone at all.
John Hawkes as a young Lewis, though, it's pretty point on.
Yeah, like both of them. Like when I heard about the casting for that movie, I was like, I don't care about the quality of the movie. That in itself is amazing. But while we're on the topic of
was that pre or post Iron Lung?
Post. It was
Okay.
It was 2 years after the session.
Okay.
So, do anything else you wanted to add about De Niro?
He plays it really well for a guy that usually in his movies he's the character that's got it together and he's like the mastermind. It's a different take to see him like be the one that's fucking up.
Yeah, because obviously he had Goodfellas and stuff in the '90s, but
in Casino.
Yeah, but the thing that stands out to, speaking of the same year as Casino, the thing that really stands out to me when I keep saying it's weird to see De Niro like this in '97 is the fact that it's only 2 years after Heat.
Yeah.
When he was like the total opposite of this, like everything was under control and he knew exactly what he was doing. He was a really smart character.
Mm-hmm.
It was only the only thing that screwed over Neil McCauley was his heart.
Yeah.
And like Lewis is just fucked up beyond repair at this point.
Yeah.
But I also love the way he plays. I just got out of prison 4 days ago, because that's what a lot of it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
So and then the dialogue scene between him and Melanie when they're looking at the picture of Japan.
Yeah.
It's like everything's so well constructed. That's another scene that just kind of revels in the dialogue.
Yeah, and then they have another scene later where there's no dialogue at all. We just cut to them fucking. And it's weird.
Which is weird. It's out of nowhere, yet also the perfect punctuation mark to that scene.
Yeah. Yeah, because I
It's
think
like they,
doesn't she just kind of passively like offer it?
yeah, it's basically like they know the opportunity is there. They're just getting it out of the way.
Yeah.
And then we learn later that there was a tinge of guilt because he thought she was Ordell's girl specifically, but Ordell just thinks that's hilarious. So,
Yeah.
so with that, I do want to discuss my favorite performance in the movie.
Which is
Jackson, of course.
oh okay.
He might be, and that it's weird to say this because Hans Wanda is involved, and Steven and Calvin Candy and all of them. Ordell might be very close to being my favorite Tarantino villain
Really?
because they're so like. What do you have to say about him before I go into it?
Now you go ahead. I want to see where this goes because you know how I feel about Landa. I think Landa's a top 5 cinema villain of all time.
All right. Well, he starts off looking like he's a little like he's almost a bit of a poser
Mm-hmm.
with when he goes to answer the phone and Melanie says he's just repeating shit that you ever heard. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then she repeatedly says that both he and Lewis are the biggest idiots she knows.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Ordell does seem like he can be pretty reckless,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, because it's one of those cases where he has a really steady sort of functioning thing going on here, where he gets so that they don't bring him down. That is so later we see how easy it is to put those pieces together. That's what he's doing, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how he gets caught so quickly. But the thing also is that he is legitimately threatening at the same time.
Yeah. I
Because,
mean, throughout the movie, Jackie's scared to death of him.
yeah, and then there's the great scene in Jackie's apartment when he goes there and he's just kind of talking to her, and he knows why he's there and she knows why he's there, but he thinks that she doesn't know why he's there. And
Mm-hmm.
there's those moments where she turns a light on, and when she leaves the room, he turns the light back off and just follows her around doing that.
Mm.
And then it's this perfect moment where there are so many ways they could have shown us that she took Max's gun off of him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we could have had a scene where we just saw that, but then where would be the surprise factor when she pulls it on him?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we do that without confusing the audience as far as where she gets a gun? So they do that split screen thing. And we're just watching Max drive home. We're like, well, this is an odd thing to watch simultaneously. And then the second Max realizes the gun is missing, that she pulls it on him. And it's like that's one of the best uses of split screen I've maybe ever seen. And then there's stuff where like I said, just the dialogue. Like nobody has
Did that scene make you feel about split screen the way that you feel about the Lancer scene?
yeah.
Because I know you love the Lancer scene.
And then you could definitely make an argument for Waltz,
Mm-hmm.
but especially since he's got more years in it, there's nobody that has a command of Tarantino dialogue like Jackson does, and there never will be another person that does. And the thing is those moments where you can like we talked about the opening scene when he we realize we're watching an Elmore Leonard story, but as soon as he starts talking, it's a Tarantino movie,
Yeah.
plain and simple. But you also have those moments where you can tell that Tarantino had confidence in what he was writing because he knew it was going to come out of Samuel Jackson's mouth.
Yeah.
Like the line, I can't see him putting this line in any other movie unless he knew it was coming out of Jackson's mouth, because Jackson could bring this line to life in a way that doesn't sound ridiculous. And it's when Max goes to his door at the end, and he's like, he's pounding on the door, and then he says, I'm sorry, I thought you might have been asleep. And Jackson says, you keep fucking with me, you're going to be asleep forever. Like, nobody could have delivered that line and made it sound that good except for Jackson. I don't think.
It almost sounds like a high school insult or something.
Yeah, and that's the thing where it's like, I don't think it's a bad line. I think Tarantino wrote it with confidence, knowing Jackson was going to say it, right? So, yeah, that's so yeah, it's Tarantino characters, and it's yeah. So, anything you have to add on the Ordell front?
No, but I see what you mean about him making the lines work that might not normally work. Plus, like, I feel like whenever he's on screen, there's almost like a presence there.
Yeah. What I also really love is the contrast between his first scenes with Max and his last scenes with Max.
Mm-hmm.
Where the first couple of times he's in Max's office, he's like laid back and he's doing the whole thing.
He's actually, for Ordell, he's quite bubbly.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, I got money in my Raptor bag and all this.
And then another thing that's such a Jackson delivery that I love so much. It's probably one of my favorite moments in the movie, and I don't even know why. It's after Beaumont's been killed, and he's talking to Max about it. And Max says, "Did the police contact you about it?" And Ordell just says, "Oh, hell yeah." Just to the idea of the police contacting him.
Well, I suppose we could go into another. Huh?
I froze for a second, didn't I?
Oh. Yeah.
What were you saying?
But no, that's pretty much it for Ordell. You used to question this decision all the time, but now that you've seen it so many times, how do you feel about Robert Forster's Oscar nomination?
The more I see them, I mean, you would think I've seen the movie enough times that nothing new would be revealed to me.
Mm-hmm.
But every time I watch the movie, I love the nomination more.
Do you?
Because there's such a balance. Because to end the Ordell thing I was talking about was the contrast between his first and last scenes with Max. Or we've got the bubbliness as you talked about in The Office.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have the last scenes when they're leading up to the confrontation, or what brief confrontation there is. And the conversation between he and Max gets so dark, and it's such this visible contrast to their earlier scenes and their earlier dialogue with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, talking about Max's earlier scenes, before we even see him, we hear his voice.
Mm-hmm.
When they pull up to the office. And it's clear how Max is like this really just hardened character, and he's like this really straight, stone-faced professional character.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we kind of see that sort of drop off the first time he sees Jackie.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the rest of the movie, it's like there's this real tenderness in him that comes out more and more with every new scene he has with Jackie throughout.
Yeah.
But then whenever he has to do something like deal with Ordell, it's his professionalism comes right back, and the way he's able to find the balance in that, and the way how he's almost like reluctant to help her when it comes to the mall scene. And there's really a lot of stuff going on there that you just kind of have to look for.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely there. Speaking
of the mall scene, let's just talk about how neat the mall scene. We get 3 different perspectives of it. Like, the mall scene is really neat.
It's where we get because a lot of people were saying it felt kind of distant from Tarantino's usual stuff, but it's like when we see the way the mall scene is broken up, that is like full on Tarantino.
Yeah.
Did you want to go on about that?
I just think it's a really cool scene to watch. Like, the first time you watch it, you're like, we're still here, and then like you realize there's a reason that we're still there. There's so much story told in that mall scene.
Yeah.
Plus, that's where the De Niro stare comes from.
we get the De Niro stare from Melanie's perspective, and then I always love that moment when we're watching Max's point of view scan everything, and then Lewis is just there looking at.
Yeah.
It's like it makes us feel like we've been caught by him.
Yeah, it does give you that feeling. It's like, oh shit, he saw us.
That's the moment that seals Lewis's fate. Because
Oh yeah, because Ordell doesn't really get mad until he's like, "You saw Max Cherry there."
So you mentioned something to me once, and it's something I never thought about.
Hmm.
And I love that you noticed it, because I'm not sure how long it would have taken me.
What's that?
Talking about how the way the mall scene's broken up is very, very Tarantino.
Mm-hmm.
There's something else about this movie that's very, very Tarantino.
The end.
That's part of it. There's a body count of what, 4? It's Ordell, Lewis, Melanie, Beaumont. Is that the whole body count?
I think so.
And
Melanie is like Elle Driver though at the end of Kill Bill 2. There's a question mark.
I thought that, and then doesn't Ray say they found her?
Oh yeah, he does. You're right.
I don't think he says if she was dead or not. He just says they found her and she had the money stuffed in her shorts.
Yeah.
He doesn't confirm a kill, but I would say that's kind of.
For all we know, she could have been put in witness protection.
Yeah, because I haven't fully read the novel.
Mm-hmm.
I read it partially a long ass time ago. I don't know if that concludes anything or not, but or even how close Tarantino stayed to it, but
yeah.
Talking about was, I believe the way you worded it was 4 people die in this movie, and when they do, all of them are surprised when it happens.
Oh yeah.
All 4 people that die in this movie don't see their deaths coming, and they happen like instantaneously.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like that's incredibly Tarantino.
The only one that should have seen it coming is Melanie, because she was pushing a lot of fucking buttons. I believe that's how Lewis put it too, but she was pushing buttons.
Yeah, and I think Ordell may have seen his coming in the very last fraction of a second. But
He might have seen it when Ray Nicolet steps into the hallway.
Yeah, because I love how this would be the time in any other portion of the movie where Ordell would start talking.
Yeah.
It's like, what the fuck is this guy?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like he's so stunned that he's walked into a trap. He has no time to react, and then he's gone.
Yeah.
Where it's like the ending is shocking in 2 ways.
Mm-hmm.
It's like because the trap was just that easy.
So now that makes me wonder something. If when Jackie says he's got a gun, I wonder if the fact that Ordell didn't say anything was a red flag to Jackie that he was just going to start shooting.
It could be.
Because there's like a couple seconds when Ray steps into the hallway before she says, "Hey, he's got a gun," and I wonder if like Ordell's silence was a red flag for her, because normally he is so talkative.
Yeah, because it was almost like the silence was Ordell calculating, how do I kill everybody in the room?
Yeah.
Since he doesn't have an AK-47, he can't kill every motherfucker in the room right now.
Yeah.
But the thing about that also is not only is that kind of a surprise, because we don't realize Ordell's going to die that quickly,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also shocking for that to be a Tarantino climax, because there's hardly a climax. There's hardly a climax in the explosive way we expect, but
Mm-hmm.
it's still absolutely the Tarantino setup where there's so much build up, cutting back and forth between Jackie preparing to shoot him when he walks through the door, cutting back to he and Max driving there.
Yeah.
And then we're always promised a bang at the end of Tarantino building up a lot of tension, and the bang comes, just the shock of it is how brief it is.
Mm-hmm.
Which once again kind of takes us forward to like the tavern scene in Bastards, where we get nearly 20 minutes of build up. And even though that's a massive shootout, it's like 9 seconds. It's so brief.
Yeah.
But we nevertheless still get we receive what we were promised. So
And then you have the opposite effect, like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where we've done all this buildup, and the climax takes a while because it has to be done by hand. There's no guns. The closest thing to a gun's the flamethrower.
yeah.
But even then, I think Rick Dalton has that flamethrower on longer than the shootout is in the tavern.
Yeah, yeah, he probably does. And I suppose we'd be remiss if we didn't mention Pam Grier to some extent, who is basically, not only is she like the center of the movie, but the way she's able to have like the tough exterior that we've known her for from her movies in the 70s, but she's also kind of gets to play with expectations on that because she also has to seem like scared and fragile in some cases. And then there's the love story between her and Max, which in a genius move is never really talked about between the two of them.
No.
It just kind of exists without words.
Yeah, and for most of the movie, it doesn't feel romantic. It feels like two really good friends.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how they leave things.
Yeah. And then it's also one of those cases where you can tell that whatever she feels for Max is sincere. Because you may question it a lot because by the end of the movie, she's playing like everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like he's kind of the one person that was able to stay in on it the whole time, pretty much.
Which is funny because he's probably the character that would have been duped the easiest if she was duping him.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's almost loves that way between them.
You're gonna have to repeat that. You cut out.
Where it was able to, what was I saying now? Where it adds to the sincerity of that love story, where it didn't eventually come to that. Where like you would think there'd be one more turn where it turned out she was playing him too because she was playing everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that it doesn't come to that adds a sincerity to their whole story.
Yeah, she even invites him to come with her, and he actually turns it down to go back to work. He's like, "Man, I still have this job where I can just go watch movies in the middle of my day."
And Debo will take care of things while I'm gone.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. So I think that covers pretty much everything. The only character we didn't cover is the one that connects these two movies.
Yeah. So do you want to go on to Out of Sight?
We can. Or we could talk about Ray Nicolet here because he doesn't have much to do in Out of Sight. All he does in Out of Sight is get judged by Dennis Farina.
I do love the back and forth between them.
I love how the very first thing he calls him out for is his FBI shirt.
Because at first I was trying to remember if the sequence of events is in chronological order between Jackie Brown and Out of Sight, and then there is the one mention of he went from the ATF to the FBI. So it's like, yeah, this is after. Out of Sight is after Jackie Brown.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on Keaton before?
I don't know. I don't know. Michael Keaton's usually good in what he does.
I think what's great is not there's the back and forth between he and Michael Bowen that they have together that really works.
The fact that he looks like he does in Jack Frost kind of fucks with me.
They were only, what, a year apart?
I think so, 97 and 98, I think.
He was probably on a break from filming Jack Frost when he filmed this cameo in Out of Sight.
Probably. He's probably like, oh, I need a break. Even though most of the movie for him is voiceover work.
I think what I love the most about Ray Nicolet is things you can say similarly about Max Sherry. about how he has like this really laid back attitude with like the way he dresses and the fact that he apparently rides a motorcycle. It's
Yeah.
something that's always
But like the entire movie, he knows shit's weird. He
yeah, but
knows
there,
that he can't prove it, but he knows that shit's weird.
yeah, that's the direction I was going, where it's like but that professionalism remains, where it's like everybody in this movie eventually figures it out. It's just a matter of at what speed.
Yeah.
Because there's
Somebody
that
like
great
Wardell, it was too late, but once he got it figured out. Well, no, he kind of had it figured out when he took
because there's that
Max and went to his office. He was piecing it together there.
yeah.
He just didn't anticipate Ray Nicolet being there.
Yeah, because there is that moment where if you ever start to doubt Ray's professionalism, there's that moment with the money where she talks about just taking one and getting away with it,
Mm-hmm.
and how he says that he basically just says, "Well, that's not how the ATF does business," and he gets like really serious about it.
Yeah.
When it
Like
looks like
you
he's
get you get the feeling that he's kind of fond of her, but he definitely doesn't trust her.
yeah.
Like you kind of feel like that like there might be an attraction there, but maybe not.
Yeah, because the dinner scene kind of leads us to think whose motives are apparent here. I can't quite tell.
Mm-hmm.
And
There's
then
just so many.
it turns out
Mm-hmm.
it really just turns out that dinner scene between her and Ray is just throwing out some information that's going to be really crucial.
Yeah.
But the way they sneak that stuff in without it feeling like blatant exposition is why Tarantino's amazing. So
Yeah. But yeah, I think that covers all of Jackie Brown now, so we can move on to Out of Sight.
do you want to start on Out of Sight?
It's definitely. How do I put this? Out of Sight feels like how Jackie Brown at times feels like a Tarantino movie. Out of Sight, I feel like definitely feels like a George Clooney movie.
Not necessarily a Soderbergh movie, but a Clooney movie for sure.
Yes.
Out of Sight was the perfect segue for them to get to Ocean's 11.
Because Clooney is really good at playing the character that you're pulling for, even though you know in the context of the story you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Because he plays likable very well. George Clooney just seems like a very likable dude.
Yeah, because he always, still to this day, he hasn't even been in a movie in a while, and he still gets that criticism of he's always just playing himself. But it's like, see, I'm against that, yet I also always struggle to say an argument.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like when he can make a character work so strongly with that kind of like confidence that he has, like it's almost, I don't quite want to say arrogance, but it's pretty much there, right?
If you think, you and I talked about this the other day, if you think Clooney is always playing himself, just watch him in his Coen Brothers movies.
Yeah.
Because in all three of them, well, I forgot about Intolerable Cruelty, but in 3 out of the 4 at least, he's a total fucking idiot.
What's interesting is
I
there's
think my favorite of the 3 might be Burn After Reading.
Yeah.
Because everybody is just Burn After Reading is just an animal all itself.
It's a movie of characters that are nothing but idiots. That's all they are.
Yeah. And the Coens are behind it, so you know it's quality.
But the way he's able to also play characters that are like so incredibly smart, like I mean, Jack Foley has his moments where he falters because obviously he always gets caught.
Yeah.
But he's also got those moments like the very opening scene when he robs the bank.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, have you ever seen a bank robbed so calmly?
Yeah.
using nothing but charm.
Yeah. If anybody could pull it off, it's Clooney.
It is worth noting when we were talking about this kind of being a good companion piece to Get Shorty as well. It is not only is Sonnenfeld an executive producer and DeVito's a producer, but also Scott Frank, who adapted Get Shorty into the script, did the same here as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, with Jackie Brown, while you could see it was an Elmore Leonard story with Tarantino's words, you can fully see Leonard's words here for sure.
What I think is really interesting too about this movie is the casting. Like, it's a movie about criminals and law enforcement, and the character that is furthest from both is Dennis Farina, who feels like he should be right there in the mix, like trying to catch George Clooney.
Yeah. Would you like to hear an interesting connection?
Sure.
Do you recall Karen Sisko branching off into her own series briefly?
No.
Yeah, it was a short-lived series where Karen Sisko was played by Carla Gugino.
Uh-huh.
And guess who played the Dennis Farina role?
Scott Glenn.
Nope.
Ah.
What?
I thought you were making a Jack Crawford connection. Because you said there was a connection.
No, Robert Forster.
Oh. Huh.
How's that for a connection? And Justified, the series,
yeah,
is based on an Elmore Leonard story, and Carla Gugino actually reprised the role in one of the episodes of Justified.
Really?
She had to go by a different name for copyright reasons, but it's the same character.
Huh. It's interesting.
So on the topic of her, I would say, if anything is the star of this movie, it would be the chemistry between Clooney and Lopez.
Yeah, I would say so.
Because the whole trunk scene, by all accounts, should not work as a meet cute.
Yeah.
And I believe she even addresses this, where they talk about the romances in movies that happen way too fast.
Mm-hmm.
But there's just something about the way they speak to each other in this scene. Even though she ends up shooting at them by the end of this scene,
Mm-hmm.
it still kind of works perfectly.
If I remember right, even Ving Rhames tries to be like, dude, it doesn't work that way.
I have to say, I particularly love his reinvention of the Howard Beale line from Network.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore turns into I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take any more of your shit.
Yeah.
He's so confident that's the line.
Even we were talking about this before with Lewis, but that whole scene also, there's a lot of bumbling going on. Mainly because Steve Zahn comes in and Steve Zahn brings the bumble.
But the thing I love about Steve Zahn in this also is that obviously Steve Zahn is an actor with incredible range.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And here he gets to do multiple things because he's very much the bumbling sort of comedy character.
Mm-hmm.
Like I love the idea of the first time he's introduced is by name in dialogue, and Clooney says, "I better not see him wearing his fucking sunglasses." And we can almost. I mean, they say his name when we see him, but when we first see him, we can immediately identify him because he's wearing sunglasses at night.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, he's just that kind of character. I love the line of, I'm going to throw your sunglasses off a bridge with them still on your head.
Yeah.
But there's also, talking about his range, because there's also the scene where he's, like, trying to lift the weights. And this is just something that's happening with no acknowledgement while they're talking about very important shit to the plot.
Yeah.
But then he gets to show his range by, like, he has like a full arc when Snoopy takes him to the house and they do like really gruesome shit.
Yeah.
You can see him change.
Yeah, it's like he realizes he's in over his head at that point.
Yeah. And then there is, and that's the thing also, is talking about how much the dialogue plays a part in this. And you can tell that it doesn't feel like it's straying away when there's just a sudden focus on dialogue that seems like it's irrelevant. Mm-hmm. Because that's what keeps the movie alive, because as the plot is good,
Mm-hmm.
but the plot is also incredibly simple.
Yeah.
Like there's hardly anything to the plot at all. It's very simple.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like with that just sort of being an underlying thread to just be the stage for this dialogue and this back and forth and the way the characters play off each other is really
Mm-hmm.
the magic of the movie.
Yeah, they're just trying to rob Albert Brooks, which
And
is
that's
funny. The last time I watched it, and they were like yelling at Albert Brooks and intimidating him. In my head, I was like, try doing that with this character from Drive.
yeah.
I don't think you'll get very far.
Yeah, where it's like I almost feel like Refn saw Brooks in this and he was like, I could totally see Brooks in this same world, just on the other side.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what Bernie Rose was.
So how much does the lack of Oscar nomination for Bernie Rose still sting?
That's just something we don't discuss.
Ah, okay.
Too. It's almost 10 years later, and that wound is. But yeah. Speaking of the people that yell at Albert Brooks,
There's a lot of them in this.
I have to say, I don't know about you, but you could say a big portion of the movie that really works is what goes on between Clooney and Lopez we were talking about, specifically when it starts to get literally steamier.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's the bathtub scene that's really famous, but the thing I love about the bathtub scene is how what the way it plays up and what happens. It almost plays up like it would be his dream,
Mm-hmm.
and it ends up being hers. And that's when we realize that there's more of a balance to this chemistry than we initially maybe had thought when she started shooting at them.
Yeah.
And then the way that goes on throughout. And this is I don't know how to say this. Um, would you say this, as far as movies go, this could potentially be, if not the most, close to the most irresistible Jennifer Lopez has ever been?
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet.
The way she rocks that Dolphins jersey, that's it. That speaks for it. That's all I have to say. That speaks for itself.
The crazy thing is that she could probably still do it now,
Yeah.
and I would be okay with that. I don't care if she has her AARP card.
I'd say you didn't see the movie, but surely you at least saw TV spots for Hustlers.
Yeah.
She's doing just fine.
Except she got snubbed too. She went the route of Bernie Rose. But
And
but talking about their romance, like it doesn't even really go anywhere. Like at the end of the movie, he's more interested in, was it Samuel L. Jackson that got in there with him?
yeah.
Yeah. He's more interested in that than anything else.
Yeah, because they play up their romance throughout, like it's inevitable it's going to end with her catching him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like they both know that, and they both kind of, it's like you can sense that between them, where he's got to stay out and not caught just long enough to do what he needs to do.
Yeah, it's like the movie's taking it upon itself to remind you, yes, you want these two to end up together, but it's just not possible.
Yeah.
And and they don't cop out with like some fantastical thing where Clooney helped, catch Don Cheadle, so he's out of no, he's got to pay for what he did.
Yeah, because you always talk about that, where I kind of just talked about this in the Humphrey Bogart video I just did, where it's almost like this whole thing that people just expect that as long as you're the protagonist, you're going to get away with everything, no matter
Mm-hmm.
what kind of person you are. And it's
Mm-hmm.
always so refreshing to see the protagonist face consequences if need be.
That happens to Clooney quite a bit, because that happened in Ocean's 11 too.
So Soderbergh will not let him get away from prison.
Nah.
And it's I also love the way that happens in Jackie Brown also. when she's like, it seems like she's really close to talking her way out of getting caught with the money.
Mm-hmm.
And then they find the cocaine, and it just directly cuts to her in jail.
Yeah. They could have just done the jail door sound effect that you and I made a joke out of for a while.
And the thing was, is that about it as far as the romance goes?
Yeah.
The segue I was using was, even though you could say that's the star of the movie, I gotta say, I think my favorite part of the whole movie is Don Cheadle.
Yeah.
Because obviously I just love villain characters in general, but this character especially, and the way that he's built up to be like past his prime,
Mm-hmm.
and then he immediately knifes a guy after that's established.
It's
Then we
like,
get like just,
it's like we were talking about this movie earlier. These jokes are lost on your audience because they don't see the previous conversations. But it's pretty much like the scene in Space Jam where the tall white dude's like, he probably doesn't even have it anymore, guys. Cut to him back in the NBA. I mean, that was a really roundabout comparison, but it was fun to get there.
and it's just like every Cheadle scene like hits in some way. It's like every time Cheadle's in a scene, that scene is going to end in some big way, whether it be like the fish, or the scene with Steve Zahn when they go to the house,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, or at the end at the match when it's like, oh yeah, that whole thing we were going to do tomorrow. No, the climax is happening right now. It's like, I changed my mind, so the climax is happening right now.
It's like Cheetah looked at the running time and he's like, we need to do the climax now. We can't wait.
We need to be 2 hours, not 2.5 hours. Let's do this right now.
Yeah.
And he even, apparently, even though Leonard's style is still absolutely there, apparently some of the lines, or some of the actors' own lines, like, I think Cheadle's most famous line in the movie is, let me see if I have this. In this kind of situation, there is a high potentiality for a common motherfucker to bitch out. I think that's the line.
Yeah.
Apparently that's Cheadle's own line that he came up with. There was actually a whole thing where recently he and Chris Evans were having a play fight on Twitter.
Yeah.
And Chris Evans is apparently a huge fan of Out of Sight.
Oh, that's great.
So while they were play fighting, Chris Evans used that line. Like, he just tweeted that line at Don Cheadle. and the fans got mad at Chris Evans because they didn't know that was Cheadle's own line, and they thought he was saying that to Don Cheadle.
That's funny.
The thought of Chris Evans saying that to Don Cheadle unprovoked is hilarious.
Yeah. I wanna see him say it to him while they're both dressed in full Avengers garb. Like, I want to see Captain America say that to War Machine in full costume.
I'm sure that outtake is around somewhere. And there's also talking about the climax, and you mentioned intolerable cruelty earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it funny that there is a very similar moment in this movie that would later turn up in Intolerable Cruelty, where they're doing something illegal in a rich person's mansion, and Clooney is saved by the big dude accidentally killing himself. It's a running Clooney thing now.
Yeah.
That's definitely a Leonard thing. White boy Bob walking up the steps and just tripping and falling and accidentally taking himself out. It's just
Yeah.
Another thing that stands out with this movie is something we were talking about yesterday. I don't know when this is going out, but just so we're clear, we shot the Prestige video yesterday as of filming this.
Mm-hmm.
The timeline is really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's another one of those cases where you're not always sure where you are until you see a scene play out in its entirety.
Mm-hmm.
Like the scene with Clooney and Albert Brooks in his office. And if I remember correctly, the context of that scene does not tell us in any way until it's revealed that that's the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
And then the way it pieces together, like how Albert Brooks fits into the story, how Cheadle fits into the movie, and it all kind of eventually puts itself together.
And it doesn't really bring the characters in until it's time. Like there's no, like Don Cheadle doesn't stick around in the movie early just because we need to use him later. We bring him in when it's pertinent for him to be there and be introduced.
Yeah. Yeah, there's such a smoothness to how it's all put together.
hmm In that way, it is very Soderbergh.
Yeah.
Because Soderbergh could put together a crisp movie pretty well.
Yeah, and it's not... Because sometimes when that happens... Because I think it was Soderbergh that famously said the line, it's not a director's job to stand in front of the camera and say, I'm directing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a thing where it's like, in a lesser movie, it would feel like the timeline is that way to intentionally confuse us just for the sake of it.
Or as like a gimmick.
Yeah, to basically make the filmmaker and the writer feel like they're smarter than the audience. It can be really condescending when you do a movie like this.
Mm-hmm.
But the way
Do you have an
Soderbergh...
example offhand that you can call out?
Now you see me.
Okay.
That's always,
Sticking with the magic theme, I see.
That's always my go-to answer for a completely dumb movie that thinks it's smarter than everything else.
And it got a sequel.
That's even fucking dumber, but let's not open that can of worms.
Mm.
But the way Soderbergh has a grasp on this movie, we're confused just long enough. Like, just when we've about, think, okay, I need to know what's going on now, the scenes come back around and we're able to figure it out.
It's like Soderbergh knows when you've reached your breaking point.
Yeah, and it's always like perfectly timed. It is worth noting, on top of an adapted screenplay nomination, this also scored a nomination for editing, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's all I have to say about Out of Sight. I think.
Yeah. Which do you think is the superior film?
This is something I say so often, especially when I'm doing end of the year lists.
Mm-hmm.
Out of Sight is incredible. Out of Sight is always incredible. I thought Out of Sight was amazing. When I saw it, I was too young to even know fully what was even going on.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, I was so confused by Out of Sight and its timeline, but I still knew there was something special in it
Mm-hmm.
when I first saw it. And obviously that only gets better with time. But when am I not going to choose the Tarantino movie?
That's a good point.
No, not every Tarantino movie is my favorite of its year, but more often than not, you can assume if the Tarantino movie is there, I take the Tarantino movie.
Okay, let's test that. Let's test that theory. Was there something better in 1992 than Reservoir Dogs?
My favorite movie in 1992 is The Crying Game.
Okay. We know 94. I know 97, I think. Do you give the edge to Titanic?
Yeah.
The Kill Bills. Aren't you in the camp that you think Kill Bill is his weakest work?
I'm in the Death Proof crowd. I know that's an easy choice, but as far as his weakest, but yeah.
I still really like Death Proof. I watch Death Proof pretty frequently, just because I think Kurt Russell's a ball of fun.
So, yeah, and 2004 with Kill Bill 2, my favorite of the year was Collateral. That's a given as well.
What was it in 03 for Kill Bill 1?
I'm not entirely sure. I want to say I have Mystic River as my favorite movie of 2003. But I'd have to check.
Mystic River is really good.
Yeah. I have these written down somewhere in some file, but
I know why it happened. I still think Mystic River should have beat Return of the King for picture. Mystic River's so good.
We're on the internet. Careful what you say about Lord of the Rings. It's very, very sacred.
I'll die on the Mystic River hill. It's worth it.
Lord of the Rings is very sacred to many, many, many people, especially on the internet. So be careful.
Yeah, but Mystic River's so good.
All right, we've gone so
Hell,
far.
Mystic River got Tim Robbins the Oscar win that he couldn't even get the nomination for in Shawshank. That's the power of Mystic River. But I think the rest of them, you do choose the Tarantino movie because Bastards, I think you picked for that year. Did you pick The Hateful Eight for its year?
It and The Revenant are basically neck and neck, but at the time I chose The Hateful Eight.
Okay. Django was the best of its year for you. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was the best of its year for you. So probably 50-50, I'd say. You
Yeah,
go
it's pretty
50-50
close.
with them. Yeah. So you're not a complete, total biased fanboy. Just 50% of the way.
All right, so before our meeting cuts off, we should probably end this.
Yeah, go for it.
I have no idea what the next thing is. Once again, probably a King video, and then we'll just go from there. So
Yeah.
we'll,
You and
and
I'll
we'll
do it. Well, you and I'll do another video. We'll figure out what one later. So for those of you watching, it'll be a surprise.
yeah,
There's a couple that we've got. There's a couple we've got in the chamber that we've talked about, but we'll get there.
This one was pretty unplanned. We did the Prestige video, and you were like, "Let's do another one tomorrow." It's like, all right.
Well, now that we have this, we can pretty much do them whenever we want to.
Yeah.
So expect more joint efforts. So get in the comments and put your suggestions in there because now we found a way to get to them much faster.
Yeah, we've gotten so many suggestions in the comments. I keep meaning to write them down when no one tells me what they are because I stay the hell away from the comments. But
Well, have them give you another list and we'll start knocking them out. So.
all right, so is that it?
I think we're
That's
good.
about it for me.
All right.